I just really discuss what goes on with him and what his skill set and stuff like that is going to look like. Now, I'm going to make a second video of this. Now, keep in mind, as soon as I finish up with the boons and all my campaigns and stuff, then I will come back and do a run through of all my boons and everything that is involved with my boons. But for now, I just want to talk about, I'm going to talk about my stats, I'm going to talk about my gear, and I'm going to talk about my abilities. And those are the three portions that this video will cover today. So as soon as we load up here, I'm going to get right into it. Alright, so nothing going on right now, but so we are just chilling here. So let's first off, let's look at my character sheet. So we're gonna talk about my stats first. So if we look at my stats, this is my current stats look like, but to get more in depth into what I'm doing here, I basically, at the beginning of the game, you're allowed to roll your stats, and you're trying to aim for as high constitution as you can. I think I got my roll to about 22 or something like that, and then with my classes bonus I was able to give myself a little bit more. But your target goal is definitely going to be as close as you can to 30, if not above 30 if you can. For constitution is essentially the majority of your hit points, as well as it reduces your damage taken. It also just is overall is overall the main stat for pallies in general. I gave myself a little bit of dexterity, a little bit of intelligence, and then a little bit of wisdom. Again, my class bonus gives me the higher wisdom than here, and then again you're aiming for about 20 to 25 charisma if you can. As you can see, I have 21%. The reason for this is the stamina regeneration and the action point gain are incredibly important to my build. Heading into the rest of my stats, I prioritize getting some power just for increases to damage, as well as just base other stuff. I have a little bit of armor penetration, but it's actually not important, and it won't be important for this character. I definitely invested a lot into recovery. I wanted a lot of recharge speed so that I could use my abilities more, as well as increase the amount of action point gain. I'm taking the extra 25 action point gain as well. I'm taking some extra control bonus. I definitely want high defense. Defense means less damage is going to be taken by me, so as much defense as I can get to. Right now I'm currently sitting at 12k, so a little bit more, and this is before any of my buffs or any of my stuff goes off. This is currently sitting about 12k, so that's subtraction of about 30% damage taken, so it's a very nice damage. And then I had a little bit into deflect. This is secondary to defense, so definitely prioritize defense. But then what deflect does is it has a chance to reflect some of your incoming damage back to your enemies, so it's very useful for tanks in general, because you're going to be the primary focus of most mobs and bosses, so having a high chance of reflecting their damage back to them is very good for you. I then prioritize regeneration over lifesteal, basically because of the way regeneration works in combination with blocking as a paladin. Being able to get increased health regeneration, as well as increasing my incoming healing, meaning if I'm getting healed by a healer in my class, it's very useful for solo play as well as just group play. So I don't prioritize lifesteal or anything like that. I have a little bit of stamina gain and a little bit of incoming healing bonus, a little bit AoE resist, a little bit control resist, and some movement. That's pretty much what I'm working with my stats. Looking over my gear, I don't really have great gear right now, but it gives you an example of what I'm doing. So as you can see, I have a lot of hit points off my helmet, a lot of power, defense, regeneration, and then I'm using a utility slot for movement. Heading down, I have again more hit points, some action points, again defense, deflection. I'm using my defensive slot for deflection in this space, and then I'm also grabbing regeneration. Heading down again, we get some more health, some more power, some more recovery, and some defense. And once again, I'm using my utility slot for movement. Heading down to my weapon, I'm currently using power as well as some offensive slot of power and then recovery. If you can get defense or regeneration on this, it's both of them are fine, but I prefer recovery. As for my shield, I'm currently using defense. I'm using my defensive slot for increased defense. I also have deflection as well as more regeneration. Continuing on with my boots, once again, more life, recovery, defense, deflection, and once again I use my utility slot for movement. Heading over to my waistband, I am running a life waistband. I'm getting defense and deflection, and my current defensive slot gives me the deflection bonus. I'm currently running a Styrian Ring of Stein, which gives me 3% increased Everfrost damage resistance. It also gives me defense and deflection, and then I'm using my offensive slot for power and my defensive slot for more life. And then heading up, I'm using Awesome Ring of Helig. Currently, I am getting power from this as well as recovery, and then I'm using my offensive slot for more power and then my defensive slot for more defense. And then lastly, my current amulet, I'm using a Reviving Amulet of Smiting. This gives me power, it also gives me recovery, and then I'm using my offensive slot for more power. My current relics are basically just the Sigil of the Oathbound Paladin. You get this from the quest line, so it's very easy to get. I'm basically using this just for increased healing and damage resistance. It also gives me increased maximum life, so it's very useful for that. I currently have a Beacon of Cimmeril. This is from an event, so you might not be able to get your hands on this right now. However, the event probably will come back around and you'll be able to get it. Once again, this heals, and it also does a couple other things like buffing power for people who catch the lanterns. The next thing I'm using is a Bruner's Helm. Once again, this is obtainable. I believe I got this from the dungeon. So you can summon the throne of the Dwarven God. It buffs allies and debuffs enemies. It gives me increased defense and lifesteal, and makes foes move slower, as well as giving me some extra defense. And then lastly, I'm using Waters of LZ. This is again from a quest. It heals you for a bunch of health, and it also helps in removing things like poison. It also gives me some extra recovery. So these are my current, that's what my gear looks like currently. Again, I will do boons in another episode, but this is what currently my gear looks like. So now I'm going to head into the power section. Heading into powers, so to start off with, you're going to get 1 point in every single one of these, that you get 5 points spent automatically. So as I started leveling, I will increase Radiant Strike and Valorous Strike. These are going to be your main 2 at-wills for the beginning of the game. Burning Light is somewhat useful, however, I will quickly be replacing this, so it's not really a huge deal. An Aura of Courage, I definitely prefer to use throughout the majority of the game, actually even into endgame and endgame tanking and stuff like that. Because of the amount of damage resistance I have, it's actually just fine for me to run things like this. And then I leveled up Divine Judgment up to rank 3. So I'm just going to go through all my ranks right now. I do have, I believe 6 levels over max level, so I believe I am essentially level 77, but basically max level is 70, and then you'll get 71 points in general from leveling trees. And then as you over level, which you're allowed to do in this game, basically just as you do quests and stuff, dungeons, stuff like that, you'll keep gaining XP, and that gives you chances to gain extra power points. So I've already gained 6 of those. There's also some extra power points you can gain from campaigns, but I don't have those just yet, so currently I'm at 77 points spent. So let me just run through what I currently have, and I'll give you my recommendations on what you guys should use at the end. So I upgraded my Radiant Strike to rank 3, Valorous Strike to rank 3, Burning Light to rank 3, Aura of Courage to rank 4, Divine Judgment to rank 3, Sacred Weapon to rank 3, Smite to rank 3, Heroism to rank 3, I ignored Lay on Hands, Bane to rank 3, Aura of Truth to rank 3, Aura of Vengeance to rank 3, Templar's Wrath to rank 4, Binding Oath to rank 4, Aura of Protection to rank 3, Shielding Strike to rank 4, Shield of Faith to rank 3, Aura of Wrath to rank 3, Divine Touch to rank 3, Vow of Enmity rank 3, Divine Protector rank 4, Aura of Radiance rank 4, Aura of Valor rank 3, Circle of Power rank 4, and Aura of Solitude rank 1. Now, you cannot get your rank 4s until you have already reached level 70, so I will discuss why I went over the current abilities to rank 4. So, Circle of Power, Binding Oath, and Templar's Wrath are my three rotational encounter powers. So all of those at rank 4 are incredibly important to me because this is what I mainly use when I tank things. So having them as their maximum abilities is incredibly important to me. Shielding Strike is my main at will. This is basically what I use when I don't have encounter powers up and I'm just standing there. The purpose of this is it gives me a shield that absorbs damage, so it's incredibly useful for my build in general and allows me to be able to run things like Aura of Radiance, which is my first buff that I use. What this does is it damages any enemy I run up to and builds bonus threat for me, which helps me with my tanking. And the other aura I currently use when I tank is Aura of Courage. What this does is it gives me, as well as my allies, 1% of my maximum hit points as bonus radiant damage. So, stacking health increases the damage from this. So that's why I maintain reaching it to rank 4. Now, when I'm solo leveling and questing like that, I use Sacred Weapon, Smite, and again, Templar's Wrath. Sacred Weapon gives you increased bonus radiant damage for the next 3 attacks. And then Smite is a really large AoE as well as single target damage. So those are my 3 skills for leveling. But however, because leveling is secondary in terms to my tanking, that is why I did not max these out yet. If I continue to get more power points, I will probably go through and get these up to upgrade for level 4. However, if I am currently capped on my power points, then I'm perfectly fine with what I currently have. The last thing I use is Divine Protector, as well as running Heroism. Heroism is for single target, is for when I'm solo running. Since you're allowed 2 daily abilities, Heroism gives you 100% increased maximum hit points as temporary hit points. It also increases my damage by 15% and or increases damage resistance by 15% and gains immunity controls for 4 seconds. And then what shield our Divine Protector does is for 3 seconds you shield all allies from harm. You redirect 60% of your damage they would take to yourself. All damage you take while this effect is reduced by 60%. This 60% does not include the buff from defense or anything like that. It's just a flat 60% reduction. So this essentially makes you a walking shield for your party. So that's currently what my setup looks like as far as my powers and everything like that. The last thing you should be aware of is what Sanctuary does. Sanctuary as an Oath of Protection gives me 80% increased damage reduction, as well as my allies gain 20% damage reduction. So it's important to be able to know how to utilize this correctly. This will gain points for this throughout combat, and basically by pressing R1 you're able to cast this skill, and it will buff your defense as well as your enemy's your allies' defense. The only other thing for this is the Oath of Protection also grants me damage resistance by 10%. It also generates 500% more threat, which helps me maintain aggro even though my allies should be doing significantly more damage than me. So the last thing I'm going to cover is my feat points. This is what I run. I am first off running 3 points into toughness. This gives me increased hit points, increasing my maximum hit points by 9% at the maximum amount. I run 2 points in Divine Action. This allows me to use my Divine Call more often. The 2 points gives me 2% of my max action points every couple seconds. So this is, since you get 3 uses of that, this is essentially 6% of your max AP. The next thing I do is grab 2 points into Light Shield. This gives me 1% increased damage resistance. I then grab 3 points into Exemplar's Haste. This reduces the cooldowns on my encounter powers, which is incredibly important because I basically rotate through them as I head into the Paragon fleets. I'll explain why this continues to be incredibly useful. I then grab 5 points into my auras. I want the increased AoE of my auras. So that maxes out at 10% increased radius to my aura. So instead of doing 30 meters for my auras, it goes up to 40. And then the last thing I do is I run 5 points into Constitution, which gives me a total of 2.5% maximum extra hit points. Heading into my pairing feat points, I am currently running 5 points into Unflinching Resolve. This gives me 10% increased control resistance. I run 5 points into Steadfast. This gives me a 5% increased damage resistance and deflect chance while I'm not moving. Following that up, I run Martyr's Blood, 5 points. This gives me 10% less damage for 8 seconds on any mob that I apply Martyr's Blood to, which I have a 10% chance to apply Martyr's Blood to any enemy that hits me, so it's pretty often going to happen, and this helps me out with just survivability. I run 5% into 5 points into Vigilance. Whenever my encounter powers come off of cooldown, I gain a stack of Vigilant. As Vigilant stacks up, you may consume them by using my Divine Call, which again is our L1 ability, and this allows you to get a shield that for 8 seconds that absorbs 25% of all my incoming damage. So it's very useful to use, and it's going to be up quite often. Again, this is why having the reduced encounter powers recharge rate is incredibly important. I follow that up with grabbing Avenger's Presence. So whenever my ally is damaged, I gain Avenger, which causes my at-wills to reduce the cooldown on my currently cooling down encounter powers. Essentially, every time, if my allies take damage while I am tanking, I will get Avenger, and while I'm spamming my Shielding Strike, which already buffs my defense, I will then reduce the cooldowns of my encounter powers. As my encounter powers are coming off cooldown, I gain stacks of Vigilant. So this gives you a nice rotation of increased damage reduction as well as defense as well as extra shielding. And the last point I spend is Holy Barrier, and then as you take damage, you will slowly gain stacks of Barrier. And then when I use Divine Call, I also gain my stacks of barrier are consumed, and I gain a shield equal to 5% of my maximum health per stack of barrier consumed. After activating this, however, I cannot use it for 10 seconds. However, this gives me a really large amount of shielding if I use it correctly, and are using it within the rotation of these two, so that I am both giving myself as much shielding as I can, while keeping my allies as safe as I can, as well as mitigating as much damage as I can, as well as reducing the damage that my mobs and opponents are dealing. Heading down, I grab Gift of Light. I heal for 10% more. I don't actually use a healing skill, so this is kind of a toss-up on whether or not it's fully useful. However, I did not really importantly care about this. I mainly cared about the next two talents. So this, I guess, helps out because when you block as a paladin, you are able to heal allies, so it helps out a little bit there. Heading next, the important thing I wanted to grab is Warrior's Bastion, which gives me 10% more defense from my equipment. This helps me mitigate a lot of damage, so it's very, very useful for my class. And then last thing I wanted was Aura Gifts, which gives me my allies within 30% of me it gain 25% of my current power. If they remain within 30 meters of you for at least 6 seconds to gain this buff. So this also helps me buff my allies and makes them stronger and makes them deal more damage, while also giving it's just a passive buff, so I don't even have to cast anything for it. It just happens. So that's what that's the overview of what my character currently looks like. Again, as I am completing campaigns and I'm currently in the middle of completing all my campaigns, I will get back to you guys on the next portion of this, in which I will go over all the boons that I'm using, my companions and stuff like that. So thank you guys for stopping by. I told you once again, this was just a quick stream to discuss this, but this is everything I'm using with my paladin and everything that's currently going on, as far as my character, as far as my stats, as far as my gear, as far as my powers, and as far as my feats. So thank you guys all. I'll catch you all later.